it's great to see you. I present you Jared Pace, QA Manager from Wargaming United States, with the speech on feature
All United States.
deconstruction. Jared, welcome.
Thank you. I don't think the stage is big enough. So thank you all for coming. I know there's a lot of good talks during this segment, so I appreciate you coming to mine. Hopefully I don't disappoint. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for 4C for putting on the conference and inviting me out. I'm a little nervous, so if I talk too fast for the translator, just throw something at me, I guess. Just don't hit me in the face, please. I know the title is also a little different than what was on the brochure and outside. I was going to originally talk about some of the organizational structures we've had over the past few years, but as I was making the presentation, it was very boring. So I decided to focus on one thing that we're doing that's different and kind of new, and hopefully it is something you guys are interested in. I don't think it's the right way. I think it's just the way we're doing it, and it may not work for your team. It may work for your team, your QA team. But yeah, let's jump right in. So a little background. I started at Wargaming about 4 or 5 years ago. I was in part-time QA tester. And over the years, I've been very fortunate to be able to work my way up and do different things like Super Test Manager, which is where we work with a group of players, and they are kind of like closed beta testers for us. I've also been on special teams for UI testing and things like that. But when I became QA manager, it was time for me to make sure that the team is running efficiently and running at the best of their capabilities. And I was very nervous because I'd only worked at QA for Wargaming, and I wasn't very experienced in how other teams were running their projects and running their teams. So I started to go to some conferences, much like this one. I even went to one in San Francisco that's only for QA, video game QA. And the takeaway from that was that QA everywhere complains about the same things, regardless of whether you're from Blizzard or if you're from Riot or if you're from Wargaming Chicago, Baltimore. There were 3 things that typically were the backbone to every talk, and it's that QA is underpaid, QA does not get the information they need soon enough, and then QA is not included in the direction, the creative process of making video games. So it was I guess it was good to hear other people share some of your concerns, but at the same time, there weren't a lot of solutions. And so I started thinking to myself, how can I try and solve this problem? Or actually, what is the problem in the first place? So I think the question that it came down to, what is the value of QA in your organization? And specifically 2 parts, how does QA value themselves? And then how do the other departments value QA? In some cases it is QA is there to find bugs, and that's all they do. And if you have that mentality, it's not hard to understand why QA isn't brought on until there are bugs to find. And then as soon as the bugs are going to stop getting fixed, you let QA go, and that's how many organizations work and have worked for a long time. So that was, for someone in QA, kind of horrifying. I'm lucky with Wargaming that there's never an end to the bugs, I guess, but because not a slight against the development team, but the fact that we continue to have a live product and update a live product, so there is some job security there. So I started to think, though, could there be a value to QA other than finding bugs? And so that's what this talk is about. I was being a little sensitive about the subject, and one of my biggest complaints is that the way that QA is perceived as a destructive force, right? This slide's horribly animated, horribly drawn. I did it all myself, so we're going to stop that before someone gets sick. But QA is the last step to a release, and it's their job to dismantle and destroy and break down the game, and it kind of clash with the creative nature of creating something and putting it out for the public consumption. And in some ways, it's nice to have that mentality because it's like a war cry, like Braveheart, you know, before you go slaughter some features. But at the same time, too, you want to be a part of an industry that creates something. And when you've got people that are 18, 19, 20, younger employees that want to be a part of something, they want to feel like they can contribute. So that was my goal. I wanted to find the value of QA, and I wanted to make it more of a constructive force rather than a destructive force. And then I remembered a course I took in college. I was an English education major. I don't know why. I thought I was going to teach, I guess. Then I went to American high schools, and I said, no way in hell. So I majored in English education, and one of the studies was on literary theory. Let's get past this here. And one of the theories is a literary theory called Deconstruction. So I thought, well, that's kind of nice. It popped in my head because I kept using the words construction and destructive. And so we're going to talk very, very briefly about deconstruction because I slept through that class a lot, and I probably won't do the theory actual justice. But it starts with this simple idea, and I stole this idea from YouTube, and I give him credit at the end if you want to actually watch the whole video because I straight stole the idea. So this is an elevator. You can tell all art is good when you have to actually label what something is. And on the elevator is a sign, and the sign says "Seeing Eye Dogs Only," and that refers to, of course, service dogs that help people with visually impairment get around. And so the concept here is, a deconstructionalist who is applying that to literature. What they do is they break down in very, very excruciating detail, painful detail, each and every word and how it's organized and where it's located in the text and the history around when the text was written. They break everything down to try and pull out meaning from what they're reading. And so in this case, a deconstructionist would say, well, obviously, it's for service dogs, right? But seeing eye dogs only means, okay, so no other types of dogs, right? No pets. Okay, that's great, I guess. But then no people either. Only seeing eye dogs can use the elevator. And then how do they push the buttons, right? Because, they can't get, floor 9. They're not tall enough, right? So no people. And then you have to also take a step back and say, wait a minute, is this sign for blind people so that they know they can bring their dog in there? And if so, how are they reading it, right? It's written in text, or even if it was in Braille, do they, feel around the elevator to see what so this type of, and this is a very basic example, and it's probably much more elegantly done, when you're actually talking about literature. But, this basic example, as I was reviewing deconstruction, I thought, well, that's kind of what QA does, right? And it's all, especially when you talk about localization, these types of things go out all the time to the public, and you may be a Russian playing the game, and you read this text, seeing eye dogs only, and it's not localized correctly, and you're like, okay, it's kind of strange. Or even worse, it's interpreted incorrectly in the development team, and the engineer is writing this in the game, and he says, well, I guess only seeing eye dogs allowed in this elevator. And now your Sims game is ruined because your guys can't get off the first floor, right? So something like that. So, again, this practical example, QA does this a lot, and really good QA can look at non-visual, non-verbal features and apply the same sort of mentality to those features. And, sure, 95% of the time there are no problems, but the one time you catch something like this, it's kind of like a big sigh of relief. It's a very obvious intention that maybe can create some very strange actual implementation problems. So I wanted to create a position that could do this, but the biggest problem is QA is getting the build after it's created. So the damage has been done. The seeing eye dog, only a seeing eye dog can use this elevator once it gets to QA. And hopefully your QA is good enough to say, hey guys, no people are getting in this elevator. That's kind of a problem. Probably the greatest bug title in the history of JIRA is if you can work that in somewhere, that no humans can use the elevator in your game. But we want to be able to catch these things sooner, right? There's always a big push. How can we catch things earlier in the development cycle? How can we find it? It's exponentially more expensive to fix a problem after it goes through the development cycle. So how can we catch them sooner? So that's what I created a position at Wargaming, and it's called the QA analyst because I'm terrible at naming things, and you write a suggestion in the email, and it turns out that's the name 2 months later. So be very careful when you just create positions. But so I created a role called the QA analyst, and I took at this time there's 6 best testers, and we put them in this role, and we'll explain a little more about what this role does, and again how they work with features from the kickoff to the actual deployment of the feature. And so it looks like this: kickoff meeting. Red is QA. I'm going to try and carry that theme throughout the slide. So it took me like 2 hours to change that black figure to a red figure in Paint. So to be impressed. So the kickoff meeting, which is where the feature is brought to the strike team. So in Wargaming, if we have a new feature, it usually gets assigned a specific developer, like for UI, for design. If it's audio heavy, then there may be our one audio guy in there, but they form like a small strike team of people who will be responsible for the features, and and now we are lucky enough to have QA as a part of that team. One analyst will go to the meeting, and they'll be kind of the representative of QA, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. There's obviously everybody's favorite documentation, right? And the second the kickoff meeting ends, all design documentation is already expired and incorrect and out of date. So the QA analyst, actually, we keep our own documentation, and we'll talk about that as well. And then finally to deployment and to the live product. We deploy about every month and a half, 2 months, a brand new feature. And this same QA person, especially if his feature is a major feature, will be a part of that deployment, and then actually a part of monitoring the health of the feature as it's out live. So they'll be in the forums, they'll be on Twitter, they'll be on Facebook. They'll be looking to determine, how is this thing actually interacting in live? Is it blowing up? Is it quiet, right? Because there's never good feedback on the internet. It's always only bad, so silence is usually your only indication that things are going well. But this one person then can take that product from the beginning to the end of the cycle. And what's really nice about that is what they learn along the way, they bring back to the next feature that they work on. So the kickoff meeting. By far the hardest part for QA, because when QA gets in a kickoff meeting, they're like, hell yeah, I almost swore, and I try not to swear. They're like, hell yeah, it's my time to be the designer. I'm going to tell them, I played Overwatch, I played, Lawbreakers. It's go time for me, right? And they're ready, or worse, they're typical QA, and they're like, this will never work. This is dumb. That's broken. You should have done this. That's gonna break. It breaks every time, And they become a real mood killer, when you're trying to have a meeting about deploying a new feature. So you take your best QA and you have to prep them a little bit, and you say, look, you're not there to be a designer. You're not there to be a producer or financial analyst. You're there to be QA and represent the interest of QA, which is risk analysis, which is, I think I have some points here. Yeah, here we go. Any conflicts yes, you make slides. It's wonderful stuff. Any conflicts, right? When you make a game over 3-4 years and you're updating it every month, you forget about crap you added sometimes at the beginning of the cycle. And it will come back and it will break things that you are trying to add new to the game. Even something simple like, we forget that the 360 was really popular with like silver profiles versus gold profiles, and what could silver profiles do that gold profiles can't do. So sometimes we have to remember that people are still playing on the 360, and we add a feature. If it's a multiplayer feature, which our game is a multiplayer game, it has to be accessible only for gold members, and there's weird rules and things like that. But so if in the meeting they're talking about this thing, QA can say, hey, what about gold profiles, or what about silver profiles? What about minimum install? Or if they're good, what about the certification requirements? Anytime you have a gamer tag, listed in the client, it has to be accessible by Xbox profiles. So, those things you have to remember, and obviously you don't want to go through every single one of them in the meeting, but the major ones, if you can identify it sooner, then, design or UI can say, okay, we need to probably come up with a solution for that, depending on, the scope of the feature and when it's implemented. Again, for documentation purposes, right, things change when you get a group of guys together. UI will say, no way, that's not going to work, right? Or that's going to take us 7 months, or, the engineers say that's just not technically possible right now with what you're trying to do. So things will change in the meeting, and they need to note that. And then also, this is the time to say, like, hey, we need you guys to add this because you want us to, you're implementing UI that's going to have thousands of players. Well, we only have 20 or 30 testers. So we need to be able to cheat sometimes and flex and be flexible to test things that we can't normally test, by ourselves. So a great time to put up front, like, hey, we need to be able to give ourselves a crap ton of experience, or we need to be able to give ourselves this tank, or whatever the case may be. Then everyone's favorite topic, which is the documentation, right? Again, design usually comes up with a document about, what is going to be in this feature, what's it going to include. Sometimes there's a technical document as well, about, what they're going to do from the technical side. And then, again, they're usually out of date almost immediately after they're written, right? But if you assume they're out of date and you don't look at them, I guarantee you something will go out the door and they'll be like, wait a minute, why can't humans use this elevator? And it's like, oh, I'm sorry, we didn't think that was a real requirement. Or worse, you'll think humans should use the elevator, but really it was for seeing eye dogs. And you're like, what? You're like, oh, they're like, oh, check the design document. So we actually keep our own documentation, but we still review the things that are written by design. And actually we review it very carefully because every statement in that design document is a test case. Right? Everything that's written and says, players will do this, players should see this, after this happens, this will happen. This is an actual design document for tournaments, and very clearly you can see there are several test cases that need to be tested. So line by line, we'll go through the documents and we'll create a MVP, minimal viable product, test case list. We'll make sure it gets reviewed, or should make sure it gets reviewed. Some of our UI guys in the back are probably like, yeah, that's what they say in theory, but we make sure that we get the test cases reviewed and signed off on. And then as things change, we don't really worry if they update their document. We will keep our own, and it'll have like a very comprehensive list of how to use the feature, how to cheat the feature if you need to. And actually, at the end of the entire process, that becomes the framework for what we supply to the publishing offices. So for our CSRs, for our community managers, because at the end they have to answer questions, and players have 1,000 questions, and if you don't educate them on the feature, then they don't necessarily know how to help players. So we're also very fortunate. We work closely with our publishing teams, and we'll take what we funnel from all the different sources, what we clean up, what we make readable, and what is applicable to them, we will then apply them or give to them, and they can use that documentation if they need to. So this is the documentation portion, and again, this happens through the entire process, because again, things always change. And now testing. So again, let's say the feature, the kickoff meeting goes well, the documentation's being written, things are slowly starting to be implemented. I think an unexpected benefit to having a QA analyst be assigned to a feature is now it cleans up the communication between QA and development, right? Developers will always, there's two ways I think of implementing a change to the game. Either you wait till it's ready and you implement everything at one time, which is usually like 2 days before it goes live, right? Or you slowly implement it and QA is destroying it while it's still being developed. And engineers, artists, designers are upset because I know that's a bug. I know I haven't gotten to it yet. I don't need you to remind me or, go crazy and write a bunch of bugs that aren't technically issues yet because we're not done with the implementation. So the QA analyst can kind of control this communication. They can go to the developer and say, hey, you're missing images for everything in the UI. Yes, that's coming tomorrow. Like, okay, if it doesn't come tomorrow, we're going to bug it, but at least we know we can wait a day. And then vice versa, QA will write a bunch mess of stuff, and depending on how large your QA team is, there's almost always going to be duplicate material or things that are unclear, and that analyst can then be a part of that and clean up the language some, say, hey, this has actually already been bugged here, or it's being fixed here, That's not even an issue, right? Things like that. So kind of clean up the communication between the analysts and the developers. And the larger the team grows, I think the nicer it is to have someone that can be the go-to guy for one source of information. And again, if his documentation is being kept up to speed, he can be sick, or have a vacation or something, and you're not crippled because he's already done some of the work, but they can help facilitate that communication. So testing goes on. Testing, for us is usually 3, 4, 5 weeks, depending on the version, and then we have to go to certification for Microsoft and Xbox, and then it goes to the live product, assuming everything in that time span goes well, and then you get the real determination of how well the feature was developed. It hits the players, and players, as you can see, forums, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook. There's no limitations on player opinions and feedback. And our QA analyst team is comprised of a previous team that we had, which was called the Live QA team, and they did what I mentioned earlier. They in the forums, in Twitter, on Reddit, and they were being a part of the live game and getting bugs that you may only find in live and bringing them back to development. Because to be honest, we're lucky on the Xbox and the 360 and the PS4. What you get in the box is what the players use, right? So we don't have to worry about 90,000 different configurations. But even still, we find that internet speeds in Nicaragua, not as good as they are in the United States, or different places of the world, and that creates specific bugs that we just wouldn't find. We find a lot of localization bugs this way, right? Because we don't do a lot of internal localization testing, and they're bound to miss things live. But so our team is up for the deployment of the feature. When it goes live, we bring the servers down. They're there to make sure that the services come up without any problems, and then they are looking for bugs and making sure they didn't miss anything or identifying any real problems. Sometimes, one little thing, missed, and one small bug times 20,000 people at one time, and you've got serious problems in the live game. And so so they'll be monitoring and they respond to players, and again, you have to be trained to deal with players because it's usually 95% emotion, and then 5% logical application. That's probably too cruel. My players are going to watch this now, and I'm going to get hate messages in the forums. And then so the job is done. It's been about 2 months, and how do you confirm that that QA has done a good job? The QA analyst role, which is a lot of intangible things. You're looking at bugs written, maybe you're looking at the quality of the bugs written and things like that. So measuring success, is really important for this newer role, and so we look at mainly is what bugs did we not know about? What bugs did we miss? It's the 2 little bugs, out of the spotlight. If there aren't any, then that's been pretty exciting, right? There are cases where we know about bugs and they go live and they're reported as bugs, and we're like, yeah, told you, So, but the real cases we're worried about things we don't know about. How did we miss that any player that starts with an R, can't get into game? I think that happened once because of some code that, I don't know, something in the back end that wasn't working correctly. It took a long time to figure that out, right? But if we at least have them listed and we have them in the system, then we're either working to fix them in the next update, or maybe they're getting fixed in a hot patch after this. So that's one of our biggest determinations of success. Obviously, there's lots of other things, but bug service post-release. Also follow up with the developers, right? Because QA, we're lucky to have the opportunity to be a part of, again, the creative process, and so I want to make sure that they're not overstepping or maybe underperforming with the development team. I want to make sure that it's a good symbiotic relationship and they're actually helping and not slowing down the development process. Most of our QA analysts, they meet with the developers If they have stand-ups, weekly stand-ups or updates, they're in those meetings. And so it's just a good to get a sense of how are they working with the rest of the team. And then also how are they working with QA, because I was worried when we made this team that the other QA testers would feel like less of QA testers because they're not being a part of this new process. But you want to make sure that there's still good communication internally, that we're not disrupting our team any, and that we're still operating as efficiently as possible. So, the question became that I think a lot of QA ask very often, because QA does get saddled with some weird jobs and responsibilities, is why is this QA's job? Why can't a designer update their documentation? Why can't an artist, or a UI engineer, why can't they do these things for QA, and then QA can focus on testing? And the reality is, I just don't care, right? And I'm trying to be rude, and I understand that QA gets stuck with a lot of weird jobs. Like I hate setting up playtest, for the external press. It's the most annoying thing in the entire world. But with this, I was completely okay with us doing a little more work, a little more documentation work, a little more work in the forums, a little more work responding to players. Because what it did was it got us involved sooner. It got us information we needed sooner to be better prepared for when features were implemented. Whereas before, sometimes we'd see things in games and we're like, oh, that's cool, I guess. It's good to know that that's a thing now, that we're doing that. We noticed that people that worked in the live game, QA testers that worked in the live game, they became much better QA testers for the game in the beginning, because they now can see some of the problems or the experiences that players, real players, are having with the game, and they can identify those sooner. It's easy to create a new account every day, and you have a fresh profile, and you have no lingering data from previous sessions. But when you start having to deal with people that have like 200, 300, 400 tanks, they have a much different experience and performance, expectations than a new account. So getting them that exposure sooner means that you start hearing things like players aren't going to like that what you're doing there, that's going to piss players off. And sometimes you write the bug and design says, no, well, this is what we're doing, this is the direction we're going. Like, all right, and then it blows up in the forums and you're like, told you so, but you can't say that. I get in trouble when I say that. But yeah, I mean, they start to predict how players are interacting with or how players will interact with the features before they go live. And that's been really important. Let's see what else I wrote here. Oh, there you go. Get it all, I guess. Again, more constructive interaction has been a positive thing. And I think, for most QA, they're trying to get their foot in the art position, in the UI position, in the design position. And, that face-to-face communication has really helped. And, it's a springboard for us being a part of the construction of the game and not just the dismantling of it that we displayed earlier. And again, gives them the information they need to be better testers at the beginning of the cycle. So I went to the conference, a couple years ago now, and I realized that like the design teams, the art teams, they do a much better job of describing how they work. I mean, you guys are probably in here for the Horizon Zero Dawn talk. If you weren't, I caught just the ending questions, and he was talking about this is exactly how we organize our resources and our data and our scripts. QA doesn't really do that often, right? Most of the time, you just get someone like me who comes in and starts making stuff up, and they're like, well, this is the way we do things because this is the way we've always done them, or we used to do it this way, and that was terrible, right, and super annoying, so now we're going to try it this way. So I guess all I'm saying is, for those of you that may be in QA now, encourage you to come talk to me, tell me about how this whole thing you just saw was stupid and it would never work, and here's the reasons why. Or, we're trying this, we tried what you used to do, because again, I only know, how my QA works, in my department very, very well. I don't know how you do your QA. I don't know how if you do, what you do differently. So encourage you to, again, come talk to me, send me an email, or just come do your own talk, because that's the only way QA is ever going to be better at, at sharing information is by people going out and doing their own talk. So thank you, and if there's any questions.
Yes, we have a question.
Thanks.
Thanks.
So do you see these methodologies in your department as a good way to legitimize QA as a position that people want to do and as a viable career option? And going with that, how do you also mitigate the risk of having QA in a design meeting and being around designers and producers and not trying to go be a designer, be content with QA, if that makes sense?
Sure. So the first question was, how do we see the methodologies paying off? Is that correct?
Yeah. Do you think it's working to make QA a more legitimate career option?
I definitely think so. I definitely think, like, at the very least, it's making them better testers, which is really important. But I'm starting to get emails from someone who'll be like, "Hey, this guy, who's doing this feature, crushed it. He saved us." And and it is legitimizing testers, especially ones that are really good communicators, and teaching them soft skills that maybe they haven't quite acquired yet. So I think it's going to take a little more time for us to see any bigger payoff. But again, this is probably 70% like production type work, and if they can start those skills early, then they're in a great position to fill a producer role, or even a lead role, because they're learning some more responsibility and communication skills. So definitely think it's paying off. Again, I wanted this to be more about writing bugs. Selfishly, I wanted QA to be more than that. So hopefully we're seeing the development team feeling the same way. And then what was the second? Did I just kind of doing both? Okay. Yeah, close enough.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
How soon do you give the feedback to the developers? You've mentioned the case when some feature wasn't working with the silver accounts. So do you give the feedback after the feature has finished and passed on to the QA, or are you involved in the meeting planning the feature?
Sure. Hopefully, depending on how important they feel the feedback is, right? If they're like, okay, guys, we've been sometimes and we're like, you guys are missing a major piece of this puzzle, right? And you need to know about it now. Kickoff meeting is completely appropriate. But if it's something smaller that should just be in consideration, kind of for the development, it could definitely wait till email. And actually, learning what type of communication is most appropriate is a really important skill, right? Like, not everything needs to be immediately face-to-face. Some things aren't appropriate in Skype. Some things are appropriate in Jira tickets. So it just kind of depends on what the conflict is. But if it's major, yeah, right there at the meeting, hey, this is not going to work if we don't consider people being able to play on different clusters, or hey, there's no way that string is going to fit when you localize it in Russian, or because the characters become too big, things like that. It just depends. But whatever they feel is appropriate, and sometimes they're wrong, and that's why I talk to developers to kind of clean up and adjust that communication if needed.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, please.
Uh-oh. Chris is going to tell me everything I told you is good theory, not good practice, huh, Chris?
How do you deal with knowledge transfer between a QA analyst that's a feature lead on a topic? Because obviously if they move into a different position, or if they leave the company, how is that, ownership transferred to a different QA analyst?
That's a great question, and we're still trying to figure out how to improve that. I mean, the best case scenario is, and it's hard because the timing, depending on the feature implementation, is, but all of the analysts meet as a group and review features that everyone's working on, so they have that kind of peer collaboration and communication. And then also they should be presenting it to the rest of the QA testers. I mean, we've tried to do stand-ups. Sometimes it's just a timing game. Like, if they were to do it right away, at least everyone can get a conceptual idea of the feature. But again, if things start to change dramatically, you know, like something major like War Stories gets completely, the organization gets completely remade. That's a game mode that we introduced later on. Then what they tell you right away may not be true, and you can have misinformation floating around. So, but in terms of, you know, just the skill set needed to be kind of like an analyst, you know, we have kind of smaller teams in our department, hopefully no more than 5 or 6 people to a lead of some sort, and that is so that they can get personalized feedback frequently, and we can kind of help grow those skills. Did that answer your question? Okay. We're still figuring it out. But everyone has access to the documentation, right? So we always say, you know, if you have a question, go to the QA analyst, and if, you know, for some reason he's not available, check the documentation, because if it's not there, then that's probably the bigger problem, right? Any other questions?
Anybody else is interested in anything else? Yes, please.
Thanks. Which QA strike teams do you have on what, and how them interacts to each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. I should have put it in a slide. We have about probably 30 in the test department. There's myself, and then I have a lead who focuses on certification because it's very specialized knowledge. And then I have a lead who is the World of Tanks console QA lead, and all of the analysts report directly to him. So the analysts work directly with him, and he is expected to be, you know, the authority or the mentor to the QA analyst. And then as we would acquire more projects, we would see that position and that team duplicated per whatever project. So if we were to do, you know, like World of Warplanes on the Xbox, you know, we would have a World of Warplanes lead, World of Warplanes analyst, you know, and the number varies depending on how big the project is or the stage of the development. And then finally we have another lead, and they are just the QA testing lead. And their job is to, you know, train testers on the more manual testing skills, you know, or the more day-to-day testing role. And so that's pretty much how we're organized. And we have a few testers that we have a QA engineering group. They help build the tools for QA, and then testing tools and things like that.
Yes, we have another question here.
So let's suppose I'm a developer and
Web, maybe?
yeah.
Okay.
No, let's suppose I'm a game developer.
Okay.
And you know, somewhere in my code, you know, one of your QA analysts finds a bug in whatever his feature set that he's responsible for. How do you, who's now responsible for the follow through that you know, bug gets worked on? And like, how do you balance? Is it the developer, the QA analyst, you know, the developer's producer?
Sure.
How do you balance the responsibilities, you know, involved in following through that you know, bug eventually gets corrected?
Sure. So, you know, if someone finds a bug in QA, they better make sure that it's actually written up, right? No one should assume that someone else has already handled it, because odds are good everyone's assuming that and no one's doing anything about it. But if a tester finds it, so let's say a tester finds the bug, that's not the analyst, one of our, you know, our daily manual testers. We ask that they include the analyst on the bug, but we don't make the analyst write the bug, because that's just a waste, right? That's why we have testers at that point, right? So the tester will write the bug and include the analyst. Jira has a wonderful watcher component, and anytime you add someone to a ticket, they get to see every tiny little update to it. So we ask that they just add the QA analyst to the bug if it's related to the feature they're working on. Obviously, if the QA analyst finds it, they don't need to add themselves. They'll write the ticket, and it'll go to the developer. We assigned all tickets in QA to the developer's lead, and then it's the developer's lead's job to divvy up the work. You know, I'd like to think that all tickets related to a feature are going to the person working on the feature, but they may have multiple features, or they may be out sick, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, QA's biggest job is to make sure the bug gets written. And I remember Graham's second part of the question. He's, you know, how do QA step away from the design role and feel like they're now designers? QA's biggest job is to get the bug written, and it's very hard to disconnect from tickets if you think something really should be fixed, right? But ultimately, it's not QA's call. And our biggest goals have been lately is to make sure that we do our role as well as possible. And if something happens and the bug gets it gets missed or whatever, it doesn't get fixed in time or fixed. Well, hopefully not fixed incorrectly. We should catch that, but that's also up to the developer, and the developer has to be responsible for that too. So we're not here to be a crutch for the development team, but we want to make sure that the ticket has the correct version information, has the correct amount of people on it, the correct priority, and if the QA analyst again is meeting with developers, if it's a really bad ticket, they should be saying, hey, just make sure you saw that we wrote a bug yesterday and no humans can use elevators. So if you guys are cool with that for this version, that's up to you guys. But you should know that it exists, and it's not very it's just not a good addition to our game. The game's not working correctly. So, to answer your question?
Yeah. So you feel like QA ultimately is in kind of a report or a reporting role.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, if they're not, they're developing, right? And if I do, sometimes I do say like, if you're a QA and you're trying to learn to jump into a role that maybe is not QA, if you can fix the bug, that's like the next step, right? But you shouldn't be checking in directly into our code base or anything like that. For design decisions, you can offer suggestions, right? But you can't let the suggestion muddle or cloud the bug, right? In the end, you put the problem out there, let the designers, the engineers, the UI come up with a solution. If you have a solution you think is elegant and you want to include that, you can do that, but you can't lose the severity or the implications of the bug in that suggestion.
Anybody else? Yes, please.
So, in terms of once you have a bug that's filed and it's gone to the developer and you have a fix for it, where do you feel the responsibility should be on developing the test case? Should it be on the developer or should it be on QA?
Historically, it's always been on QA. It's always been on QA to have that test case to make sure that it doesn't re-break or it doesn't, I guess re-break would be the biggest problem. But yeah, ultimately it should be on QA. Because we do so many updates, we don't test everything in our game every time I do an update, but we do hyper-focus on the new releases because those are going to be the things that get the most attention when the product goes live. So, we will retest at the final stage right before certification anything that we have written before. And so that should be a test case because we've already seen it break once, so we should make sure that it hasn't broken again. So I put that emphasis on QA. If the developer wants to help out, I'm not going to complain because writing test cases suck. So, but this is part of the job. But
Well, I guess the reason I'm asking is we've frequently, specifically working on back end, you have a bug where QA gets it and they look at it and say, I don't even know what this is or how to test it.
yeah, that's when it's really important to clear up the communication in the ticket and say just ask the developer, hey, how can I test this? What is this thing? I get tickets all the time because they come through me sometimes to go to my team, and I'm like, I don't know what function or class you added. I don't know what any of that means. Can QA test it? And if so, give us some help. And again, that's important to have if you can establish cheats early in the game, here's different scripts you can run to help test things, or here's different tricks you can use to test maybe the more back end features or implementation, then you kind of set those up in advance if at all possible. But yeah, you talk to the developer, and some developers are like, you can't test that, and we're like, okay, and it's in Jira, so we're like, all right, maybe we're skeptical, but most of the times, the developer's not going to lie. They don't want their code to go out that's in bad shape. So you ask the developer if you don't understand it, and then hopefully all tickets, we have a very rigid structure. This is what's happening. This is what we think should happen, or we're not sure what should happen. Please see the video, and then when it comes back, if the expected results are differ between QA and development, we need to clean that up and fix that, and then we update the documentation.
We are still open for a couple of questions. Do we have any? Probably the last chance. Okay then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
one of our speakers. Hi, please introduce yourself.
I'm Jared Pace, the QA manager for Wargaming Chicago Baltimore.
Hi, Jared. So tell us, what's the very first video game that you've ever played?
The very first video game I ever played, I'll say the very first game that I remember would probably be like Ocarina of Time. That was the first time like I remembered playing a video game and enjoyed it, and like start to finish. So, yeah.
Legend of Zelda is a big introduction to the gaming industry. Is it your favorite of all time, or is it another game?
No, favorite of all time. Again, an impossible question. Probably either like Diablo 2. I'm gonna give you a couple. Diablo 2, Mass Effect 2, and Witcher 3. So somewhere in between those three games, favorite of all time.
Hard choice for me as well. I can understand. What led you to the gaming industry, Jared? How did you find this job?
So I got lucky finding my job, but I knew I wanted to work in games because you spend so much time playing games, and I really learned how expressive a medium that video games could be. So I moved to Chicago, and I immediately searched for any openings in any video games, and I found day one, which is now Wargaming Chicago Baltimore. So luck, but I had to work in games. So.
Great. What's your favorite thing about the industry? Do you like something in particular?
Favorite thing, I think culture, like, we talk about games, we go to work and the news is about video games, work is about video games. So, it's just being a part of that group of people that really like and talk about and a part of video games. We work really hard, but, when we are taking a break and relaxing, it's about video games. And so it's really exciting.
Is there anything that puts you out of your element in the industry, something that you don't like or get annoyed with?
Puts me out of my element. Like I say, making video games is harder than people realize, right? We work, 10-hour days, some 12-hour days, sometimes more. The things that put me out of my element, the internet culture sometimes can be kind of upsetting. People forget that there are humans on the other side of the Twitter accounts and the Facebook accounts that they go on. So, usually, if you can remind them that, like, hey, we're people, and, if you talk to us like people, we respond, like people. And when if the internet culture can't get past, degrading and being rude just for the sake of being rude, that's probably the worst part. But that's not just games; it's movies, everything. So, but we persist. We make games because we love them. So
That's great. Where do you think the industry will be like in 10 years' time? Do you have any predictions? What are the trends gonna be? Anything?
Yeah, sure. I think games continue to gain more and more steam as an entertainment medium. Movies, television, we are on par, if not going to be surpassing, the level of emotion and interaction and investment that people put into those mediums. You watch a movie, and you fall in love with a character or a movie or a plot, that's fine for that hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours. But, games are extensive, more, 10, 20, 30 hours if you're playing like The Witcher 3, and, you're doing the action, so you're really invested. So I think that, as a medium that can provide so many things like education or entertainment or just, getting people involved, I think they're going to become more and more prevalent, and you're going to see them being used more and more often, especially in schools. Like educational games are going to really rise. So I think continue to be more powerful. Games are going to be more part of everyday society for sure.
Do you think that one of their aspects is gonna become more important than the other, or maybe right now one of them is more important than the other? I'm talking like graphics, story, gameplay, these elements.
No, I think that they all require each other. I think graphics are probably going to hit their peak because you can only
there's only so much fidelity I think you can get out of games. I think storytelling will continue to rise, but in the end, it's all about how engaged is the player, and all of those things work together to engage players. Will we ever be on par with like books or movie for storytelling? Maybe not, but we're getting really close. But I think that, again, it's not which is better, it's just what is the experience. And then because experience is so personal, it just depends on the person and what they're looking for. And so I think it's balanced. I don't think anyone's going to be the most prevalent part of the industry.
Speaking of experiences, so which one would you like to create if you had absolute creative and financial freedom? Like, what video game would you create if you weren't restricted at all?
I'm a big proponent. I love story games. I love RPGs. I love role-playing games. And, that's not something, we do a ton of right now in Wargaming, but we're making more like, we have our War Stories release where it's more like short stories, So I want to be a part of a game that creates good stories. I mean, I love The Witcher. I love that atmosphere. I love that environment, that character. I love Mass Effect again. So anything like that, I'd be so happy to make. I want to make an experience where again, people are invested from beginning to end, and they learn about themselves by playing a video game. That's what good stories do. And so any environment, like The Witcher or Mass Effect, would be incredible to be a part of that environment. But they say you shouldn't make games you like to play. So maybe I'm wrong.
That's a new one. I haven't heard that one. Why not?
So because you cheat and you see behind the curtain, right? So when you get to make a game that you love, it becomes a labor of love because you have to really work to make that game, and so you don't want too much of a good thing. I think is probably closer to the reason. You don't want to. If you peek behind the curtain, then you lose some of the magic that may be the story. Imagine making like Mass Effect. I guess there are 5 now, and you know the ending before you start the game. You kind of rob yourself of that experience. So that's that's what they say. But at the same time, I'd love to be a part of that. And learn to make a good RPG.
That's a very interesting perspective. But let's just shift it for a moment to the real world. I know it's boring, but whatever. Just for a moment, what do you think about St. Petersburg?
St. Petersburg is beautiful. I thought when I was coming to Russia that I would see golden citadels and Russian architecture all over the place, and we landed, and it reminds me a little bit of Paris in the sense that it's a little flatter. We learned today that they didn't want anyone building buildings higher than I think the Windsor Palace, so that's kind of why St. Petersburg is flat. But I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous when it's lit up at night. St. Petersburg has like a light in every arch in every building on their main road. So like you look down the road and you just see the entire city is illuminated, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Everyone's been very friendly. Even people that don't speak any English, they've been very friendly and helpful and respectful. It's an opportunity of a lifetime to come out here, to come to St. Petersburg and be a part of 4C and be a part of just a different culture. I'd encourage anyone to come out and visit because it's a beautiful place.
Now that you are a part of 4C, what do you think about the conference so far?
Oh, so far it's been great. Today we had a great team building day. We got to go around St. Petersburg and look at the architecture and look at and learn about the city. I'm a little nervous to give my speech, but I hope it's gonna go well. And there's so many brilliant people in one room. You have to go around and introduce yourself and learn from other people and learn about what the experience they have. And there's not many things better than doing that and meeting other people and learning about how they develop games and what they do differently. So it's incredible. I mean, it's awesome. So I hope I'll be a part of it next year as well.
Hope so as well. Say you were interviewing yourself. Which question would you like to ask yourself?
Jeez. That's a trick question. I think you're tricking me into giving you an answer that I wasn't prepared for. I think I would, if I was outside the industry, especially if I was watching, I would ask myself, how do you become a part of the game industry, and how do you pursue something that you love? Because I love video games. So how did I get into games? And the answer to that is, do you want me to answer it or do you want me to ask the question?
You can do both.
Okay, I would say like it's getting into games is all about, or getting into anything you love, really, especially with the internet nowadays, all about how much you care and how much you're willing to put forth that effort. I mean, you can go online now and get any information you want, about anything. And one of the most important things about making games is to learn to make games. Unfortunately, you just have to make games. And, very often in the industry, we tell people to fail fast, which means you try something, successful, unsuccessful, you do it, you learn from it, you try again, and you keep doing that over and over and over. So go out there and make video games, and it's tricky because playing video games is so much fun that you think that that's good enough, but you have to actually try to make them as well to really learn from them. So I would encourage myself or anyone else interested to go and just make as many games as possible from scratch and really learn what goes all into it. And you start out making tic-tac-toe and you realize how complicated tic-tac-toe is just to make, and then you think about Mass Effect, you think about Witcher, you think about all these Prey, all these popular games right now, Battlegrounds, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, and you realize how hard it is, and you gain appreciation for it. So yeah, I mean, if you love it, you have no excuses. If you love something and you want to do it, you have no excuses to not get out there and do it. So.
That's true. Well, we're here to share the knowledge and to learn to make video games better and just to have fun. So any specific speech you're looking forward to, maybe?
Oh, yeah. Geez. So there's, I think the guys from Lawbreakers are here. They're going to give a speech about just anything Lawbreakers. I love to hear from them. Let's see. There's a lot of good user experience speeches that are going to be here, how to, and a lot of getting data and monetization. One speech, I'm going to cheat. Can I cheat and look at my book?
Sure, go ahead. We're gonna take off points from you, but.
Okay, I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. I'm going to cheat. Let's see. Oh man, I have too many. Yeah, there's a great speech about managing passion that someone's going to give. That has to do with, I hope it has to do with, not being too excited, but also, being excited enough about being in games. So I don't know, there's a bunch, and as I meet people and talk to them about their speech, I start to lean towards wanting to listen to them because, people are so passionate about what they're going to be talking about. We have guys here, talking about, starting and creating their own business, which is incredible, the Simply Gone guys. So, yeah, I mean, I don't have one, no. I have a full 2 days ahead of me. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, all of us are, and you're very passionate, definitely, about what we're doing here, so I hope you can manage that.
Yeah, I know.
And have fun.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.